Hello and welcome. This is the fourth chapter in the Elicitation Collaboration session or study session for the CBAP, ECBA, and CCBA exam. That being said, let's get started. So in terms of the chapter 4, which is Elicitation Collaboration of business analysis section, there's a couple of things to keep in mind. So what is elicitation and collaboration, and what is that all about? So it's a knowledge area that describes the tasks that business analysts perform to obtain information from stakeholders and confirm the results. It also describes the communication with stakeholders once the business analysis information is assembled. Elicitation is literally drawing forth a receiving of information from stakeholders or other sources. So let's start off with a case study. So for those that have been watching the videos on the YouTube channel or have visited our website, we've used an example of a business analyst, Amanda, and she is responsible for getting requirements to move a pizza store from a brick and mortar store to an online store. So in the current state, they do not have what they do not have is an open website for folks to come in and make their payments. So that being said, this allows them, going through the solicitation activity and collaboration activity would allow the BA Amanda to really draw out the requirements from the stakeholders. So in this chapter, something to keep in mind is the BACM or the BACM, which is the Business Analysis Core Concept Model. So what is the BACM? BACM speaks to changes, solutions, context, value, stakeholders, and needs. And how is that connected to elicitation? Now let's look at it in more detail. So needs. So in terms of needs, they use a variety of elicitation techniques to fully identify the characteristics of the change, including concerns that stakeholders have about the change. The change itself may determine the appropriate types and extent of elicitation and collaboration. The next one is changes. Elicitation uses a variety of elicitation techniques to fully identify the characteristics of change, including concerns that stakeholders have about the change. The change itself may determine the appropriate types and extent of elicitation and collaboration. The next one is solutions. Solutions elicit, confirm, and communicate necessary or desired characteristics of proposed solutions. Contexts apply a variety of elicitation techniques to identify business analysis information about the context that may affect the change. Collaborate with stakeholders, and that's value. Collaborate with stakeholders to assess the relative value of the information provided through elicitation and apply a variety of techniques to confirm and communicate value. The next one is stakeholders. So manage the collaboration with stakeholders who participate in business analysis work. All stakeholders may participate in different roles and at different times during a change. Let's look at the key tasks. So to remember the key tasks, the mnemonic is Peter can catch catfish while making food. So P is for Peter, C is for can, the other C is for catch, the other C is for catfish. While has nothing connected to that. Making is connected to M, and food is just a random word. So the first one is P, which is prepare for elicitation. C is conduct elicitation. The other C is confirm elicitation results. The other one is communicate business analysis information. And then you have manage stakeholder collaboration. So that being said, what would Amanda do in her case? So at the highest level, she prepares for elicitation. She then conducts elicitation activities. She then would confirm elicitation results. She would communicate business analysis information, and then just in general, she would manage stakeholder collaboration. Now, speaking of inputs and outputs to these tasks, you have needs and stakeholder engagement, which comes from the previous chapter, which is plan, business analysis monitoring and planning chapter. So in that case, you would prepare for elicitation and the output would be elicitation activity plan. To conduct elicitation, your input is elicitation activity plan from the previous task and business analysis approach from chapter 3. Then your output is elicitation results, which is unconfirmed. To confirm elicitation results, you input is elicitation results, which is unconfirmed, and then your output is elicitation results confirmed. Now, don't confuse that with verified or validated requirements, and that's coming up in future chapters. Then you have the communicate business analysis information. The input is business analysis information, stakeholder engagement approach, and the output is business analysis information, which is communicated. And then the last task is manage stakeholder collaboration. Your input is a stakeholder engagement approach, business analysis performance assessment, and your output is your stakeholder engagement. Let's look at the first task, which is prepare for elicitation. So what is prepare for elicitation? It involves ensuring or understanding the scope of the elicitation activity. They select appropriate techniques and they plan for or procure appropriate supporting materials and resources. So that is the purpose of the prepare for elicitation section. What are some of the elements? The first one is to understand the scope of elicitation to determine the type of business analysis information to be discovered. Now, keep in mind that's different from the scope of the initiative. This is the scope of the elicitation. The second one is select elicitation techniques. In this case, in our example case study, we have Amanda. She would use this task to select elicitation techniques. Then she would set up logistics. And logistics meaning some people may be geographically distributed. So in that case, she would try to understand what is the best way to set up logistics. Meaning if it's Zoom, if it's, what needs to be set up. The fourth one is secure supporting material. Is an agenda needed? What sorts of information will be needed in order to move things forward as we elicit the requirements? The last one is prepare stakeholders. In this case, business analysts may need to educate stakeholders on how an elicitation techniques works or what information is needed. It may be helpful to explain an elicitation technique to stakeholders not involved in the activity to help them understand the validity and the relevance of the information elicited. The guidelines and tools here used are the business analysis approach, the business objectives, the existing business analysis information, and the potential value. So when we talk about business analysis approach, it's really the general strategy to be used to guide the business analysis work. This includes the general methodology, types of stakeholders, and how they should be involved. Potential value, let's touch upon that. It describes the value to be realized by implementing the proposed future state and can be used to shape elicitation activities. Now, there's a whole bunch of techniques that are used here. The first one is brainstorming, and essentially brainstorming is used collaboratively to identify and reach consensus about which sources of business analysis information should be consulted and which elicitation techniques might be most effective. You have your data mining, document analysis, estimation, interviews, mind mapping, risk analysis and management, and then you have your stakeholder list, map, or personas. Stakeholders over here are the domain subject matter expert, the sponsor, the project manager, and those are the only three involved in this case. The next technique used here is conduct elicitation. The purpose of conduct elicitation is to draw out, explore, and identify information relevant to the change. The elements here, there's only two, which is guide elicitation activity and capture elicitation outcomes. Something to keep in mind as you are going through this task is there's three common types of elicitation. The first one is collaborative, which involves direct interaction with stakeholders. and relies on the experiences, expertise, and judgment. The second one is research and involves systematically discovering and studying information from materials or sources that are not directly known by stakeholders involved in the change. Stakeholders might still participate in the research. Research can include data analysis of historical data to identify trends or past results. Experiments could be identifying information that could not be known without some sort of controlled test. Experiments can help discover a bunch of information or hidden assumptions, if you will, and experiments could include things like prototyping, proofs of concepts, and observational studies. So in our example, Amanda is trying to gather requirements, and what she will do is that she would use collaboration to essentially understand what the requirements are. She can't do a lot of research, as this is sort of a new moving from a manual effort to an online effort, not a lot of data there for her to work with. And she can't really experiment at the get-go because it's all dependent on what the original requirements are for these stakeholders. Guidelines and tools for conducting elicitation activities is business analysis approach, existing business analysis information, stakeholder engagement approach, and supporting materials. I won't go into techniques in too much detail, but there's a whole bunch of techniques that can be used during this. Highly recommend that you go through the Baybalk guide to read through. There's about 50 techniques to really hone in on those techniques. So the stakeholders here are your domain SME, your customers, your implementation SME, sponsor and end user, as well as any stakeholder. When they say any stakeholder, it's literally could be beyond what you have here. It could be anyone involved in and during the elicitation sessions. 4.3 is confirm elicitation results. The purpose of this task is to check the information gathered during an elicitation session for accuracy and consistency with other information. So let me give you an example. So Amanda has gathered her requirements and has elicited her requirements. At this point, she hasn't started documenting her requirements, but she needs to fact check. She needs to check information that she's gathered up against some initial documentation that she may have collected, or up against each and every stakeholder that she may have interviewed. So think of it as a precursor to documentation where you're validating or fact-checking information. Some of the elements here, and there's only two, are compare elicitation results against the source and comparing elicitation results against other elicitation results. Guidelines and tools used here are the elicitation activity plan and the existing business analysis information. Some of the techniques, and there's only 4 techniques here, is a document analysis, interviews, reviews, and workshops. Stakeholders over here are your domain subject matter expert and any stakeholder. Once again, they use the word any stakeholder with an understanding that there could be a lot more involved stakeholders than the normal standard set of stakeholders. So you really want to work with those to gather and understand the who's involved in comparing the results. So the next one is 4.4, which is communicate business analysis information. The purpose of communicating business analysis information is to ensure stakeholders have a shared understanding of business analysis information. In our case, Amanda would work with the stakeholders to really communicate the information. And so she would determine the objectives and format of communication, whether it's an email, whether it's it goes with the project status reports. So the format of the communication, whether it needs to be formal, informal, or it needs to be in any other sort of form. And then a communicate business analysis package, which then goes into whether there needs to be group collaboration, individual collaboration, or email, or any other nonverbal methods to communicate things. So only 2 sets of elements here. Guidelines and tools is business analysis and approach and information management approach. There's only 3 techniques used here. And the stakeholders are your end user, customer, tester, implementation SME, domain SME, and any stakeholders. So the last element here is managed stakeholder collaboration. The purpose of managed stakeholder collaboration is to encourage stakeholders to work towards a common goal. And so business analysis work tends itself to many collaboration opportunities between groups of stakeholders on the business analysis work products. Stakeholders hold various degrees of influence and authority over the approval of work products and are also an important source of needs, constraints, and assumptions. In this case, Amanda would gain agreement on commitments, monitor stakeholder engagement, and collaborate with the stakeholders. So collaboration is an important element of this part. So stakeholders are more likely to support change if business analysts collaborate with them and encourage free flow of information, ideas, and innovation. So this is one of the underlying competencies of a business analyst, is to allow for that opportunity for the stakeholders to collaborate, to bring in ideas, to bring in thoughts, and allow that bi-directional communication between stakeholders. Some of the guidelines and tools are the business analysis approach, business objectives, the future state description, recommended actions, and risk analysis results. Some of the techniques used here are collaborative games, lessons learned, risk analysis and management, stakeholder list, map, or personas. And all stakeholders are involved in this. So when we say any stakeholders, it would be any stakeholders, as in the previous elements, any stakeholders who were involved in the analysis or in the elicitation activities. In this case, they're saying all stakeholders because you're going to include all stakeholders, irrespective of whether they've been part of the elicitation sessions or not. So really, you're managing those expectations. So that kind of ends the chapter for elicitation and collaboration. I do have a couple of questions that we can kind of walk through to understand how is the CBAP, CCBA, or the ECBA questions basically designed. So in this case, the question is interviews and interface analysis are techniques used by which task? So we didn't get too much into detail around interviews, but this is a very around techniques, but this is a very straightforward sort of question. It is within the textbook. So the answer here would be conducting elicitation task would use interviews and interface analysis. The next one is which stakeholders participate in confirming elicitation results? Is it A, the BA, B, the project team, C, stakeholders with enough authority to approve requirements, or D is stakeholders who have participated in elicitation tasks? So if you remember, we went back and we looked at the stakeholders that are involved in confirming elicitation, and one of them was any stakeholder. So any stakeholder means stakeholders who have participated in elicitation tasks. So the right answer is D. The next one is you have been working on your project for 6 months and have just finished eliciting all of the requirements. A review is scheduled in 2 weeks to ensure that you have a solid understanding of your stakeholders' requirements before they are baselined. What do you have at this point as an input into the review? Is it A, confirmed elicitation results, B, specified and modeled requirements, C is stakeholder concerns, D is unconfirmed elicitation results? And reading the question, it looks like this goes back to a specific task that you're performing. And this would be to confirm elicitation results. So if you know the task you're performing, you know what the inputs are, right? So your inputs are unconfirmed elicitation results. So it would be D, and that's the answer. So before we end this, I did want to show you with regards to some templates that are on the BA Knowledge Share website that is really foundational for any business analyst going into the into a new role, or this could be more of a checklist for you to really understand how to go about gathering requirements in a complex environment. So these templates are available on our website at beknowledgeshare.com. And these are relatively inexpensive. On other websites, there's charge quite a bit. These are available for $49.99. So it really breaks down things like, what's needed in terms of requirements. There's other templates here which are tied to the foundational planning of an initiative, and this is available on the website as well. It's all part of the package. There is a traceability matrix as well, in addition to use cases. So if you do find value in these, please do consider purchasing those. I will include the link if I post it on Facebook and YouTube, but please do consider supporting this channel by purchasing these templates. So in our next week's session, we will go through the chapter 5, which is requirements lifecycle management, and hope to see you guys then. Thanks.